The Patriarca crime family, pronounced PA, modifier letter vertical line Patriarca, also known as the New England Mafia, the Boston Mafia, the Providence Mafia, or the Office, is an Italian-American mafia crime family in New England. It has two distinct factions, one based in Providence, Rhode Island and the other in Boston, Massachusetts. The family is currently led by Carmine D'Annunzio, who is part of the Boston faction. They are active primarily in Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and eastern parts of Connecticut. History. Early years. Two separate mafia families emerged in New England before Prohibition began, one based in Boston, Massachusetts and the other based in Providence, Rhode Island. The Boston crime family was founded in 1916 by Gaspar Messina. Frank Morelli formed the Providence crime family in 1917, and he eventually controlled bootlegging and gambling operations in Providence, Maine, and Connecticut. In 1924, Gaspar Messina stepped down as Boston's mafia boss, assuming a businessman's role while working with Frank Cucchiara and Paolo Panatta from a grocery store on Prince Street in Boston's North End. A mafia power struggle ensued in Boston, as rival gangs fought for loan sharking, illegal gambling, and bootlegging rackets, and East Boston mobster Filippo Bucciola emerged as the boss of the Boston crime family. In December 1930 or early 1931, a mafia meeting was held and Gaspar Messina was elected the temporary capo dei capi of the American Mafia. He retired from mafia affairs in the early 1930s and died in June 1957 in his Somerville, Massachusetts home. During the early 1930s, Bucciola battled other ethnic gangs for territory, along with his underboss Joseph Lombardo, another mobster from Boston's North End. In December 1931, Lombardo arranged the murder of Frank Wallace, the boss of South Boston's Irish Guston gang. Then in 1932, Frank Morelli merged his Providence family with Bucciola's Boston family, forming the New England crime family. Bucciola ruled as boss of the New England family from East Boston as he continued to have his competition murdered. He then had the boss of Boston's Jewish mob Charles Solomon murdered, leaving himself as the most powerful gangster in Boston. He held a party in Johnston, Rhode Island on April 27, 1952 to celebrate his retirement and Raymond Patriarca's ascension to boss of the New England crime family, and he retired to Sicily in 1954 where he ran a chicken farm. He died in 1987 of natural causes at the age of 101. Patriarca era. In 1956, Raymond Patriarca made drastic changes in the family, the biggest being to move their base of operations to Providence, Rhode Island. He ran his family from the National Cigarette Service Company and Coinomatic Distributors, a vending machine and pinball business on Atwells Avenue in the Federal Hill neighborhood of Providence. The business was known to family members as the Office. Patriarca was a strict and ruthless leader. He ran the crime family for decades and made it clear that other crime families were not permitted to operate in New England. He was skilled at warding off police and maintaining a low profile and thus received little hindrance from law enforcement. The family ventured into new rackets such as pornography and narcotics, though mob informer Vincent Teresa insisted that Patriarca forbade the family to deal in drugs. During his reign as boss, Patriarca formed strong relationships with the New York-based Genovese crime family and Colombo crime family. He worked with the Genovese family and decided that the Connecticut River would be the dividing line between the New York families and his family. The New England family controlled organized crime in Boston and Worcester, Massachusetts, where Genovese capo Carlo Mastro Titaro reigned as local boss for half a century, as well as the state of Maine, while the Genovese family controlled organized crime in Hartford, Connecticut, Springfield, Massachusetts, and Albany, New York. Patriarca's longtime underboss Enrico Tainleo was also a member of New York's Bonanno crime family. In addition to having close ties to the powerful New York Mafia, Patriarca was also on the Mafia's ruling commission and had investments in 2 Las Vegas casinos. Another of his underbosses was Gennaro Jerry Angualo, who was involved in the numbers racket in Boston, and was being shaken down by rival mobsters because he was not a MAID member. He solved this problem by paying Patriarca $50,000 and agreeing to pay him $100,000 a year to become a MAID member of the family. Angelo was based in Boston and gained complete control of gambling in the city. The Apalachin Meeting and Aftermath. In 1957, more than 60 of the country's most powerful crime bosses met in Apalachin, a hamlet in upstate New York. The Apalachin meeting was attended by well-known organized crime figures, such as Joe Bonanno, Carlo Gambino, and Vito Genovese. Raymond Patriarca was also in attendance and was subsequently arrested, drawing much attention to him from the press, the public, and law enforcement. The situation became worse for Patriarca and his family in 1961, when Robert F. Kennedy became Attorney General and began an assault on organized crime. Law enforcement agencies worked to develop informers within the mob and finally succeeded in 1966 when Joe Barbosa was arrested on a concealed weapons charge. He was a hitman for the Patriarca family who claimed to have killed 26 people, but he became concerned when Patriarca did not raise his bail and 2 of his friends were killed for trying to do so. He became an informant not long after, and Patriarca and Enrico Tainleo were indicted in 1967 for the murder of Providence bookmaker Willie Marfio. Patriarca was convicted and began serving time in 1969, and Gennaro Angualo served as acting boss. Patriarca was released in 1974 and resumed control of the family. For his testimony, Barbosa was given a 1-year prison term, including time served. He was paroled in March 1969 and told to leave Massachusetts forever. In 1971, he pleaded guilty to a second-degree murder charge in California and sentenced to 5 years at Folsom Prison. He was murdered in San Francisco by Joseph J. R. Russo on February 11, 1976, less than 3 months after his release. Patriarca was plagued by law enforcement for the rest of his life, and he was charged numerous times for a variety of crimes until his death in 1984. In 1978, Vincent Teresa testified that Patriarca had participated in a 1960 attempt by the Central Intelligence Agency to kill Fidel Castro that was never carried out. In 1983, Patriarca was charged with the murder of Raymond Kershaw, and he was arrested in 1984 for the murder of Robert Candace, whom Patriarca believed was an informant. Patriarca died of a heart attack on July 11, 1984, aged 76. Decline. After Patriarca's death, the New England Mafia began a long period of decline, resulting from both legal prosecution and internal violence. Jerry Angualo attempted to take over as boss, despite being in jail, while Larry Zannino, the family's top lieutenant, backed Patriarca's son Raymond Patriarca, Jr. for the position. The National Commission approved Patriarca, Jr.'s ascendancy to leadership and his position was confirmed. Zannino was made consigliere, but he was sentenced to 30 years in prison in 1987. Gennaro Angualo was sentenced to 45 years in prison on racketeering charges, along with Charles Tashjian. Other senior members died or were imprisoned, such as Henry Tainleo and Francesco Intiso. William, the Wild Man Grasso, an East Hartford, Connecticut-based gangster, became underboss because of the younger Patriarca's weak leadership. Some law enforcers believed that Grasso was actually in charge, but these rumors ended when Grasso was found dead in June 1989, slain by a gangster from Springfield as factions of the family began fighting each other for dominance. The death of Grasso weakened Patriarca, Jr.'s position. Nicholas Bianco was eventually indicted for Grasso's murder, but he became acting underboss before taking over the family's Providence operations. On March 26, 1990, Raymond Patriarca, Jr. and 20 other family members and associates were indicted on charges of racketeering, extortion, narcotics, gambling, and murder. The indictments included underboss Bianco, consigliere Joseph Russo, and Lieutenants Biagio Di Giacomo, Vincent Ferrara, Matthew Guglielmetti, Joseph A. Tiberi Sr., Dennis Lepore, Gaetano J. Milano, Jack Johns, John Sonny Castagna, Louis Falia, Frank and Louis Pugliono, Frank Colantoni and Robert Carrozza. The arrests were described as the most sweeping attack ever launched on a single organized crime family. One of the most damaging pieces of evidence was a tape recording of a mafia induction ceremony, at which 13 mafiosi were present. Because of this embarrassment, Patriarca was replaced as boss by Bianco, who maintained a very low profile. However, Bianco was sentenced to 11 years in prison in 1991, while 8 other family members were convicted on Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act (RICO) charges. Bianco died in prison in 1994. On August 16, 1991, associate of Vincent Ferrara and Massachusetts bookmaker Howard Ferrini, is beaten and stabbed to death at his home in Berkeley, Massachusetts. His body is later recovered on August 21 inside of the trunk of his blue 1988 Cadillac car at Logue International Airport. Bobby Donati, the driver of Vincent Ferrara, is beaten and stabbed to death at his home in Revere, Massachusetts on September 24, 1991. On January 6, 1992, all of the defendants in the RICO trial pleaded guilty and received lengthy sentences and large fines. Patriarca was sentenced to 8 years in prison in June 1992 after pleading guilty to racketeering charges. On October 2, 1992, Rocco Scali, the owner of a North End restaurant and an associate of Vincent Ferrara, is shot in the back of the head in the parking lot of IHOP in Dedham, Massachusetts. On December 8, 1992, Vincent Arcieri is gunned down in the driveway of his Orient Heights, East Boston residence. It is believed he was murdered after an argument occurred at his restaurant in November 1992 between himself and CAPO-turned-informant Mark Rossetti. In 1993, 26 others were indicted and convicted for running a bookmaking operation. Internal warfare. Frank Salem took over the family after the trials and moved their base back to Boston. His ascension to the position of boss, however, sparked tensions among family factions. On March 31, 1994, Patriarca crime family members Ronald Coppola and Pete Scarpolini are shot and killed inside of Hockey Fans Social Club in Cranston, Rhode Island by Patriarca soldier Nino Cucinotti during a card game. Joe Souza is shot inside of an East Boston phone booth on October 20, 1994. He succumbs to his injuries and dies in hospital on October 31. It is alleged the Boston faction blamed Souza for the death of Mike Romano Jr. on September 2, 1994. On December 11, 1994, 25-year-old drug dealer and Salem loyalist Paul Stratzilla is shot and killed. His body is recovered inside of his fire-torched car outside the VFW Club parking lot in Revere, Massachusetts. In January 1995, Salem was indicted along with Stephen Flemmi and James Whitey Bulger on extortion and racketeering charges, and Salem discovered through court documents that his close allies Flemmi and Bulger were longtime FBI informants. Bulger's friend FBI agent John Connolly let him run his criminal operations with impunity for informing on the Patriarca family. After Frank Salem was imprisoned, a renegade faction led by Robert F. Carrozza, Anthony Ciampi, Stephen Foy, and Michael P. Romano, Sr. waged war on the Salem loyalists. On April 3, 1996, 63-year-old Richard "Vinny the Pig" DeVincenz is shot and killed in Medford, Massachusetts after refusing to pay street tax from Salem loyalists. In April 1997, the FBI indicted 15 members of the renegade faction, including Carrozza, Ciampi, Romano, and others. The grand jury testimony that resulted in the indictments was dominated by Sean Thomas Coate, who was the first of 4 indicted members to turn government witness. The jury ultimately acquitted the defendants of most charges but was deadlocked on murder and racketeering charges. Several of the defendants changed their pleas to guilty during a second trial, including champion Eugene Reda. Salem pleaded guilty to racketeering charges on December 9, 1999, and was sentenced to 11 years in prison on February 23, 2000. In early 2001, he agreed to testify against Flemmi and Bulger. Turn of the century. The New England crime family is estimated to have about 60 main members controlling influence in the New England area, especially in the cities of Boston and Providence. In recent years, the family has been hit with several FBI RICO indictments, and two captains, Mark Rossetti and Robert DeLuca, have become government informants. The power structure was said to have moved back to Boston entering the 2010s. Peter, Chief Crazy Horse Lim 1 took over as boss of the family in 2009. Lim 1 was arrested in 2009 and charged with racketeering. He was given a suspended sentence on July 1, 2010. Retired boss Luigi Baby Shax Manocchio was arrested in Fort Lauderdale, Florida on January 19, 2011, and was charged with extortion and conspiracy. Manocchio had stepped down as boss in 2009, after the FBI began investigating two strip clubs, the Cadillac Lounge and the Satin Doll, in late 2008. In February 2012, Manocchio agreed to plead guilty and was sentenced to 5.5 years in prison for extortion on May 11, 2012. In late 2009, Anthony D'Annunzio became the acting boss, after boss Peter Lim 1 was arrested. D'Annunzio operates from Boston's North End and is the younger brother to Carmen D'Annunzio. In 2010, D'Annunzio extorted Rhode Island strip clubs with members of the Gambino crime family. On April 25, 2012, D'Annunzio was arrested and charged with racketeering and extortion. On September 13, 2012, D'Annunzio pleaded guilty to shaking down Rhode Island strip clubs, and was sentenced to 6 years on November 14, 2012. On October 2, 2014, acting boss Antonio L. Spucky Spagnolo, 72, and reputed maidman Price Stretch Quintina, 74, were arrested for allegedly extorting thousands of dollars in protection payments from a video poker machine company which installed machines for illegal gambling in bars and social clubs. Spagnolo took over as acting boss after Anthony D'Annunzio was arrested back in 2012. Both Spagnolo and Quintina are reputedly old members of the Patriarca crime family's Boston faction. In April 2016, family consigliere Anthony Ponytail Tony Perillo was sentenced to 5-year prison term for felony assault. Current family members: Administration boss Carmen S. The Cheese Man D'Annunzio. D'Annunzio is said to have taken the reins as acting boss when Spucky Spagnolo was indicted, but has allegedly been named official boss following the death of Pete Lim 1. D'Annunzio is an East Boston mobster indicted in 2008 on corruption charges stemming from an undercover operation. He pled guilty to bribery charges and was sentenced to 6 years in prison on September 24, 2009. He was released on parole in February 2015. Under boss Matthew L. Good-looking Matty Guglielmetti Jr. He was sentenced to 11 years in prison in 2005 for protecting a shipment of cocaine passing through Rhode Island. He was also arrested that year for infiltrating labor unions in Greater Providence. He was released on June 10, 2014. Consigliere unknown. Following death of Providence-based consigliere Joseph Joe the Bishop Oculi. Capos: Providence faction Edward Eddie Lato. Lato is serving a 9-year sentence in federal prison for shaking down Rhode Island strip clubs for protection money. He was arrested with former bosses Anthony D'Annunzio and Luigi Baby Shax Manocchio. Joseph Ruggiero. Ruggiero has never been charged with a crime and runs his day-to-day operations out of a series of legitimate businesses that he owns in and around Fall River, Massachusetts. He is also a close friend of former Fall River Mayor William Flanagan. Anthony "Ponytail Tony" Perillo. Perillo is now doing a 15-year prison stint for felony assault. He previously served 11 years for a double homicide that he committed in 1977. Acting, unknown. Boston faction: Gregory, Fat Boy, Coaster Frederick, Freddy the Neighbor, Simone Antonio, Spucky Spagnolo. Soldiers. Inactive members: Luigi, Baby Shax Manicchio, former boss from 1996 to 2009. Arrested in 2011 for his involvement in shaking down Rhode Island strip clubs. Released in the summer of 2015. Raymond Jr. Patriarca. Former boss and son of legendary boss Raymond L.S. Patriarca. Retired from mob life and now sells real estate in Rhode Island. Vincent "The Animal" Ferrara. Former capo in the North End section of Boston. Now owns a series of legitimate businesses in and around Boston's North End. Past members: Peter J. Chief Crazy Horse Lim 1, a former boss of the family. In 2001, Lim 1 was released from prison after serving 33 years for a murder that he didn't commit. Lim 1 later won a $26 million judgment for his wrongful conviction. Lim 1 operated from Boston and served as the family's consigliere before 2009, after which he was promoted to boss. He was arrested on gambling charges in 2009. In 2010, he was given a suspended sentence. He died on June 19, 2017. Historical leadership. Boss, official and acting, excluding Frank Morelli 1 1916–1924, Gaspar Messina, stepped down, died in 1957. Boston 1924–1954, Filippo Phil Bujola, united both families in 1932, retired, died in 1987. Boston 1954–1984, Raymond L.S. Patriarca, Sr., imprisoned in 1970, died on July 11, 1984. Providence 1984–1991, Raymond Jr. Patriarca, Jr., stepped down in 1991. Providence 1991–1991, Nicholas Nicky Bianco, imprisoned on December 28, 1991 and died on December 14, 1994. Providence 1991–1996, Frank Cadillac Frank Salem, jailed in 1995, turned government witness. Boston acting 1995–1996, John Jackie Salem, brother to Frank Salem, jail. Boston 1996–2009, Luigi Baby Shax Manicchio, stepped down, imprisoned. Providence 2009–2016, Peter Chief Crazy Horse Lim 1, died June 19, 2017. Boston acting 2009–2012, Anthony L. D'Annunzio, arrested on April 25, 2012. Boston acting 2012–2015, Antonio L. Spucky Spagnolo, arrested on October 2, 2014. Boston acting 2015–2016, Carmen the Big Cheese D'Annunzio. Boston 2016 present, Carmen the Big Cheese D'Annunzio. Boston notes. 1. Frank Morelli was the first boss of the Providence crime family from 1917 to 1932 when he stepped down, becoming underboss to Bujola. Underboss, official and acting c. 1920–1932, Joseph J. L. Lombardo, became consigliere. Boston 1932–1947, Frank Bootsy Morelli, retired. Providence 1947–1954, Raymond L.S. Patriarca, Sr., promoted to boss. Providence 1954–1967, Enrico Henry the Referee Tainleo, imprisoned for life in 1968, died 1985. Boston 1967–1984, Gennaro Jerry Angelo, imprisoned in 1983, died 2009. Boston 1984-1985, Francesco Paul Intizzo, died 1985-1989, William the Wild Man Grasso, murdered 1989-1991, Nicholas Nicky Bianco, promoted to Boss Providence 1991-1991, Frank Cadillac Frank Salem, promoted to Boss Boston 1991-1996, Robert DeLuca, imprisoned Providence acting 1996, Luigi Baby Shax Manicchio, promoted to Boss Providence 1996-2004, Alexander Santoro, Sonny Boy Rizzo, imprisoned in 1995-1998 Boston 2004-2015, Carmen S. The Cheese Man D'Annunzio Boston, promoted to acting boss acting 2008-2009, Peter, Chief Crazy Horse Lim 1, promoted to boss Boston acting 2009-2011, Robert, Bobby the Cigar DeLuca, turned government witness Providence 2015 present, Matthew, good-looking Matty Guglielmetti Providence. Consigliere 1932-1954, Joseph, J.L. Lombardo, retired, died on July 17, 1969 Boston 1954-1976, Frank, the Cheeseman Cucciara, committed suicide on January 23, 1976 Boston 1976-1984, Niccolo Nicky Angelo, demoted, died 1987 Boston 1984-1987, Ilario, Larry Baiona Zanino, imprisoned in 1985, died 1996 Boston 1987-1992, Joseph J.R. Russo, imprisoned in 1990, died 1998 Boston 1992-1998, Charles Q. Ball Quintana, imprisoned in 1998 Boston 1998-2002, Rocco Shaky Argenti, died Providence 2003-2009, Peter, Chief Crazy Horse Lim 1, promoted to boss Boston 2009-2015, Anthony, Ponytail Tony Perillo, imprisoned Providence 2016-2018, Joseph, Joe the Bishop Ocule, died Providence. Government informants and witnesses. Notes. References. External links: The American Mafia, New England Crime Bosses, AmericanMafia.com, Providence Mafia, AmericanMafia.com, Boston Mafia, American Gangland: Patriarchal Crime Family.